Christina was trained by Kim West, the sleep lady, in her Gentle Sleep Coach program. This is a program that involves dozens of hours of training, an exam, and participation in case supervision. Christina Gantcher also complete advanced training for younger babies, about 4 or 5 months of age. Her educational background includes a BA in comparative literature from UMass and a Master's of Science in psychoanalytic developmental psychology from University College London. She is a mother of 2 boys and lives in New York City with her husband, Mike Gantcher. She had the good fortune to work with Kim West personally when her older son had sleep difficulties. Find out more at Christina's website, goodnightsleepcoaching.com. That's goodnightsleepcoaching.com. Without further ado, Christina. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And as you can see on the title of my presentation, my goal here is to help everybody become sleep smart and to really help you understand why certain things happen or don't happen in terms of your child and sleep. And I've used this subheader for a while, but I thought it was fitting that it is still in play because ultimately becoming sleep smart is really what you really need to know about your child's sleep because you've actually exhausted the Google search engine as well as yourself. So there are really 3 parts to this presentation. We're going to talk about some basic sleep science. Then I'm going to get into the most common challenges and problems parents find with their child in sleep, and then talk about solutions. So in terms of common myths, the most popular common myths I confront in my work are that babies will sleep when they are 12 pounds and 12 weeks. Wrong. There's no medical research to back that up. Number 2, babies will sleep through the night when they start solids. Wrong again. Food does not have anything to do with sleep or sleeping well. And third, if you put your baby to sleep late, they will sleep long and longer in the morning, which is the key there. That is also false, unfortunately. And we'll talk about why that is the case. If there's only one thing that you will remember from this talk, I want you to remember this at all times, that sleep is actually a learned skill. Some babies will simply find it easier and others will find it more challenging. And there's a number of reasons that is. But it's always important to remember that it's a learned skill, just like crawling, walking, talking. All of those are learned skills. Secondly, sleep is a neurological development. And most babies are ready to sleep through the night, as we say, around 6 months. And we'll get into the details of that in a minute. And lastly, on this slide, I want to highlight that there's great variability about when babies are ready to sleep through the night. And I say that because, there's so much information out there and so many books that promise parents things that are simply the case for maybe 20 or 30% of the population, but if you're in 70 to 80% of that population, it doesn't really matter, does it? So I always highlight that variability because some babies may be ready to do that sleeping through the night earlier than others, and some later, and that's okay. So in terms of talking about sleep science, technically there is no sleeping through the night. Now, if you're a parent who has a sleep challenge at home, you're going, you're right, there is no sleeping through the night. I haven't gotten to that point yet. But I say this because it's actually normal for every person to have several night wakings. That's a brain function. Everybody wakes up several times a night. The issue is, if you know how to put yourself to sleep, you can do it all night long, as it were. On a completely neurological level, and I'm simplifying this for today's purpose, we have 2 kinds of sleep. We have deep sleep and active sleep. We begin our night sleep going into non-REM sleep, which is our deepest stretch of sleep, and then in the middle of the night, and when I say middle of the night, that means sometime between, let's say, 12 and 3 a.m., we shift gears very much like a car, and go into active and light sleep. And lastly, in terms of the science piece of this, I want to highlight again, there is no scientific proof that food will help your baby sleep better or well. And that doesn't mean if we're talking about milk or solids. Again, thinking about sleep as a neurological development, a brain development that goes on a fairly consistent and structured path is important to keep in mind. Common issues. You are not alone. So I would say the things that I tend to help parents with the most are the following. My baby goes to sleep very easily, but wakes several times a night, right? So dealing with night wakings, very common. My baby needs to be nursed or rocked or fed to sleep all night long. Again, several times a night. I hear very often from parents, particularly babies under 6 months, my baby will only sleep being held or co-sleeping. And then lastly, my baby won't nap. Naps can be very challenging for many children, particularly after a certain age because of development for a variety of reasons. So what's normal? Right? Because that's really important to understand, particularly when you've got your next door neighbor saying, well, my kid's been sleeping through the night for the past, several months. I don't know what's going on with you. But it's very important to understand what is normal. The age of the baby is really important to keep in mind. So developmental age is very important in respect to sleep. And whether the baby was born preterm, right? So before 40 weeks, or early. Because sleep definitely goes on a development after 40 weeks. So if your baby was born preterm, even if it's only a few weeks, it's not that there's a problem, it's that they simply may not get to certain development sleep-wise until they hit different milestones. Are there any medical conditions? Right? So the most common medical conditions that tend to stand in the way of sleep are things like reflux or GERD, any ENT difficulties such as enlarged adenoids or tonsils, any type of breathing difficulty. Is there a family history of any of this? And then lastly, also anemia, low iron stores can disturb sleep. So all of those things are very important to keep in mind if you are confronting a sleep challenge with your child. And in terms of young babies, so I want to highlight that babies under 5 months, okay, feeding is more important than sleeping. And the reason I say that is because, again, there's a lot of information out there that says, well, by 12 pounds and 12 weeks, your baby doesn't need to eat at night. Some may not. I would say the vast majority still may need to eat at night. And so feeding really comes first for those first 4 to 5 months in my estimation. We need to make sure that that's going perfectly. And if it's not for some reason, we definitely want to have parents talk to their pediatrician and or a lactation consultant to rule out any type of feeding difficulty for the child. Again, thinking about what's normal. The American Academy of Pediatrics states that babies under 6 months may not have regular sleep patterns. Now, many will present regular sleep patterns, but this gives you the idea that there's a big range of normal, and that's okay. And in terms of the AAP guidelines, in terms of how much your child needs on a daily basis, they recently reviewed them about 2 years ago and put out new guidelines in terms of averages, about 17 to 14 hours a day for babies under 12 months. Now, it's important to keep in mind that in these first few months, babies are going to sleep short stretches and be awake short stretches. So those first few months, we're talking about short windows. So again, to go over sleeping through the night, because that tends to be what most of us as parents are looking for. To say again, there is no sleeping through the night, but children need to understand and remember how they fall asleep, because that is the skill we're looking for all night long. And then, of course, later for naps as well. And so the way a baby knows how to fall asleep at bedtime becomes the foundation of what they're going to look for all night long. So to highlight one problem that many parents face, and I just like to tease out a little bit, I talk to many parents, particularly this time of year, we're in May, who say, my child wakes up every single day at 5 a.m. Now, of course, with sunrise so early this time of year, that can be due to too much light in the child's room, too early. But I like to highlight the difference between night wakings and early rising, because many children tend to get up very early in the morning. And so night wakings happen anytime after bedtime and are usually due to too late of a bedtime, the baby being put to bed asleep already, and also nap deprivation. So either naps that are too short or just poorly timed can cause night wakings. Now, in terms of early rising, which I define as waking consistently at 5 a.m. or really any time in that, like let's say 4:30 to before 6 a.m. time, that also usually happens because bedtime is too late, because of nap deprivation, and or a medical condition. So there are certain medical conditions, particularly the breathing difficulties, that can cause early rising. So I just like to highlight the differences there because they can be different, although similarly related problems. Naps. So naps are really important for children basically 3 years and under. And it's really chicken and egg in the sense that nighttime sleep affects daytime sleep, and vice versa. So many times, naps will not be great until nighttime sleep gets better. But conversely, naps may not be great because nighttime sleep is a problem. So in many ways, bedtime is the foundation of how your child understands to sleep. We then build on it with proper nighttime sleep, and then naps will usually fall into place last. And so I like to highlight that as well because many people have questions with their children in terms of naps because they change so much from, let's say, 6 months to 12 months to 18 months to beyond. And in terms of when children will stop napping, it tends to be sometime between the 3rd and 4th year of life. So now, talking about solutions. One of the most important things I talk to parents about is crib acclimatization. And what that means is your child really needs to understand where you expect them to sleep. So imagine last night you went to bed and you distinctly remember the washing up process or taking a shower, getting into bed, thinking, oh God, thank goodness. And then you find yourself waking up in the middle of your kitchen floor. And you think, wait, no, it was not like a crazy, wonderful night last night. This should not have happened. How did I end up here? And that sort of out-of-body experience, I don't know who moved me, is what your child will experience when they are transferred. And at some age, that transfer tends to stop working. Now, what does that mean? I put my baby to sleep here in my arms. It's all wonderful and cozy. I transfer him into the crib. But then he wakes up 2 hours later and is screaming bloody murder, and I'm not really sure why. Well, one of the reasons is because he doesn't remember getting into the crib. So that's really important. So making sure that your child spends some time during the day. I usually suggest a few minutes in the morning, a few minutes in the afternoon, while they're awake. Chilling out, relaxing, hanging out in their sleep space so that it is not a surprise to them when they are asked to go to sleep in that place later on. And if you heard me say, go to sleep in that place later on. Ultimately, we want our children to go to sleep in their crib, not in our arms, not bouncing on a ball, not being held, because we want them to experience falling asleep where they should stay asleep. So getting them used to their sleep space, acclimating them a little bit each day is really important. I usually suggest this as the first step in getting out of any kind of sleep challenge with your child. Next, again, in terms of when a young baby is ready to sleep through the night. If that baby is eating every 3 or 4 hours throughout a night, well, that's not going to happen if the sleeping through the night is not going to happen, obviously, if they're still eating very frequently. So most babies will be ready to go a night stretch without sleeping sometime between 6 and 9 months. But that's something to speak to the pediatrician about and ask the doctor, is my baby ready to sleep 10, 11, 12 hours without a feed? That's something they should be coordinating with you and really relating to in terms of their growth chart and how they're gaining weight. And of course, there are different methods of night weaning that the doctor should be able to guide you about, or your lactation consultant if mom's nursing. And then also figure out if my baby is feeding to sleep, then obviously we change that association first at bedtime so that then throughout the night we can be consistent. So that word, consistency. Being consistent about any type of sleep association behavior is ultimately the most important piece of changing things if you're in a challenge or problem. Because when a child experiences inconsistency, it's going to create crying. It's just that simple. They don't understand our words. They understand our behavior, right? So having consistent behavior is what is going to get you to the finish line. So ultimately, what's inconsistent? Perfect example is, well, at bedtime, we have our last bottle and the nursery is really dark and he usually just drifts off and then I transfer him. But he's 10 months old and I really don't think he needs any food at night. So when he wakes up around 12 or 1, I just go in and sort of pat his back to sleep and he goes back to sleep pretty quickly. But then of course he wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I just can't take it, so I bring him into my bed. That's a perfect example of inconsistent behavior because that child never knows, am I going to get fed to sleep? Is somebody just going to pat my back? Or am I just going to come into bed with them? So in some ways, having one thing to undo is easier, and ultimately, of course, being consistent about having the baby fall asleep in their crib is what we're looking for. Now, in terms of methods, right, because there are lots of different books out there and lots of information about how to change things, there's basically 3 behavioral ways of changing a sleep challenge. There's extinction, which is well known as cry it out. And that essentially is the method of, I'm putting my child in her crib at bedtime, I say goodnight, I leave, and that's it until whatever time in the morning you decide. That means no checking, no nothing, and that's why we call it cry it out. It does tend to be very popular. And if it works pretty quickly. It should work fairly quickly. The person who sort of coined the methodology, Dr. Mark Weisbluth, has said it doesn't work for all children. So if you find yourself in a situation where it doesn't seem to be getting better pretty quickly, you definitely want to change tact and course. Next, time checks. So time checks are basically graduated extinction and were really made popular by Dr. Richard Ferber. So Ferberizing, as many people know it as, basically goes under the premise of, well, I'm going to give my child the space and time to calm themselves down, right? So I'm going to put the child in the crib, leave, and then in graduated time intervals, quickly check on the child but ultimately allow them to put themselves to sleep. So that means going in graduated intervals, let's say 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes from the last check, not from the beginning. So you're not going in every 5 minutes. You're extending those intervals. And then lastly, fading. And fading really means, in some ways, I like to think of it as a behavioral weaning. So we're doing less and less to assist the child as he or she falls asleep, and then work our way away in physical space. So those are sort of the most popular methodologies out there to have your child get to sleep and sleep well through the night. And again, as I said before, I always want to encourage parents to start at bedtime, work on nighttime, and then work on naps last. It just tends to be the most effective way for things to change efficiently and most easily. And of course, if all else fails, please feel free to contact me. I work with families across the country and world at this point. And if not, we have a network of gentle sleep coaches, which are out there and ready to help tired parents.
All right, thanks so much. Now, thank you so much, Christina. We're going to take some questions and answers, so go ahead and join those microphones or go baby sleep Dory. And we've already got some great questions up here, and I suspect we're going to hear echoes of what you've recommended already. First one is, my son is 15 months old, and we can't get him to sleep at night without him falling asleep while drinking his bottle and then putting him in his crib asleep. Do you have any tips for how we can put him down awake for him to fall asleep on his own? Thank you.
Okay, great. So I would want to know what time bedtime is. Let's say, I'm just going to say it's between 7 and 8 p.m., which tends to be a pretty popular and good time for most young children to be going to sleep. We want to back that last feeding up, meaning let's do it earlier in time. Let's make sure it's in a well-lit room. Again, not a sleepy, dark room that's going to make the child want to fall asleep. And also think about it, 15 months, is that bottle necessary? Is it something that has been a problem for the child in terms of gaining weight? Is it, the pediatrician should be guiding about having maybe a cup or a straw cup with dinner or slightly after dinner, not in that sleepy, dark state, which is going to make the baby want to fall asleep.
All right, cool. Let's take some audience questions. We'll go to right over here.
Sure.
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It's actually somewhat related to the question from the Dory. I have an 11-month-old right now who, from like 6 to 8 months, we had like a very, very solid bedtime routine, always put him down awake. But then teething came and he was sick for like 2 months, and so there was a lot of exceptions made, and now we're at a point where basically every night we do dinner, bath time, bottle, bed, and he falls asleep on the bottle. Mm-hmm. And he actually does like wake up a little bit right as we're putting him into the crib, and then he goes to sleep, but he's like sleeping 11 and a half to 12 hours a night. And so we're like, it's all working, so don't if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But we're a little concerned that association has crept back in, and so any thoughts?
Well, what time does he wake up in the morning?
Between 6:30 and 7.
And how are naps?
Great.
So right. So if it's not broke, don't fix it. What I will say is it is working right now, so I wouldn't worry about it. If you find that something starts going wrong, night wakings or protesting nap time, again, have that last bottle in a well-lit sort of public space, right? The kitchen, the living room, someplace that's not going to make him want to fall asleep. Because on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is awake, 10 is asleep. You want to put your child in the crib at a 5 or a 6, not an 8 or a 9, because that's really remembering. If you're an 8 or a 9, maybe, kind of, not really. And then all of a sudden, 2 a.m. comes, I don't really remember how I got here. So we really want to make sure that they have that experience and that memory.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for your question. Another question in this dark, quiet, and comfortable room.
Yes.
Over here.
I want the other guy's problem. So my son's actually almost 5, and he started sleeping really quite well around 8 months. But around a year or so ago, he started waking up in the night around, I don't know, between 2 and 4. And then, like, we have a baby monitor in the room, so he cries. And I come up, and, you know, usually he goes back to sleep pretty quickly, and I've started trying, you know, what's the matter? Are you having a nightmare? And, you know, it's always, I don't know, and, you know, it's okay, you don't have to be, you know, and I can't, you know, he just keeps waking up in the night, and I can't kind of connect with him to figure out what's going on, and I don't know whether it's he can't express it or what.
Does he have any history of ear, nose, and throat difficulties, like tubes in the ears, lots of ear infections, sinus stuff, or is there any family history of it?
He had reactive airway disorder when he was young, but it's not nearly as bad, and it doesn't really seem, it tends to only be in the winter, and this problem doesn't correlate with the season.
Right.
I'm a horrible sleeper.
Okay. And is that because of any ear, nose, and throat stuff yourself?
No, I think I'm psychologically damaged.
Okay, so, you know, and lastly, so 4 years old, is he dry at night?
Yeah.
Okay. And what time is bedtime?
8:30 to 9, usually, sometimes 9:30.
And what time does he get up in the morning?
7.
I would, the first thing I would do is move bedtime, lights out 8:30 latest, because we still have to anticipate for enough time for him to fall asleep. That extra sort of half an hour, 45 minutes that he's taking may just be a little too late for him. Kids at that age have really busy lives. Their imaginations are, you know, running rampant. They've got a lot on their mind. So I would definitely give more time to get him to fall asleep earlier. The other thing is I would just, you know, keep an eye on any breathing difficulty. Does he breathe with his mouth open? Does he ever have any trouble that way? Because night wakings that tend to be at that hour consistently inconsistent can be some type of medical issue, which he may outgrow. Tonsils and adenoids tend to grow exponentially large in children between the ages of 2 and 5, so that may subside as his facial structure catches up, but it may not. So definitely want to keep an eye on that with the pediatrician or a visit to the ENT.
Yeah, so because I'm a bad sleeper, I'm often awake when I hear him wake up, and it sounds like he's afraid.
Right, and so that fear, I mean, some of it could be, you know, an active imagination. Some of it can be if your breathing stops or is interrupted, it's very scary to wake up to that. So any type of apnea that may be going on because he has some type of obstruction can be very scary.
Okay, thank you. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
Thanks. Over here.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for coming. So I have a 3-year-old, and he takes an afternoon nap most days, but some days he fights it or just doesn't want to sleep or whatever. How do we know when it's time to give up on the napping?
And so 3 years and how many months?
Like 3 months.
So he's probably in the stage of maybe sorta, which means, let's say, 3 or 4 days a week, he could still really use a nap, but then the other days, he's got enough energy to keep going. So unfortunately, it's not, the transition out of a nap is rarely 1 week here and 1 week there. It tends to progress over, let's just say several months, 2 to 3 months, where again, he may need a nap for a few days in a row and be compliant, and then he's just got enough energy not to for several days. So I can't say that there's a day you're going to know when he won't need it. My guess is he's going to show you by his mood and energy level. When children do stop napping, bedtime tends to get earlier because of course they're just so tired by the end of the day. So you want to keep that in mind. And you can always just enforce rest time.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't have to sleep. Just lay quietly, look at a book quietly, has to be quiet time. And you can set a timer for 30 or 45 minutes. You can also have a clock. So one thing I love for children, I'd really say 15 to 18 months and older, developmental clocks are great. There's lots of them out there. They're colors, right? Blue is for night, yellow is for day. It's not that your child is going to tell time. They're going to understand this is bedtime and this is morning time. And even for a nap, you can say when, the stoplight says green, you can come out from rest time. So that might be something helpful.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great question about naps. Over here.
Yes.
Hi there. Thanks for coming.
Sure.
I have kind of a 3-part question.
Okay. Go for it.
A few different issues. One, I have a 2-year or a daughter who will be 2 at the end of May and is still not sleeping fully through the night. We took her to an ENT when she was much younger to see if she had an adenoid issue or some other breathing issue. And the feedback from the doctor was, her adenoids are a little enlarged, but he kind of said it's up to you if you want to proceed with the surgery. So my first question is around how do or what's a good way to sort of advocate for her a little bit more in that field? Is it just seeing more specialists or going to the pediatrician, which we didn't see for this? My second question is, or maybe I could ask that first, and then
Sure.
I'll ask my other.
Yeah. So one of the hardest things that I have found as a parent myself is that ultimately it comes down to you. And I've been in that situation both personally and professionally where it becomes your decision to do elective surgery. I would always encourage parents to see a second specialist, get a second opinion, right? And at the end of that, it does become sort of your decision. My feeling is always if your child is not sleeping, which means they are having trouble growing essentially, right? Because we do grow when we sleep, and they're not breathing well because ultimately things like that really come down to breathing at some level. Wouldn't you rather help them out? Particularly when we're talking about things that are really outpatient surgery, right? So I would say definitely a second opinion, and then ultimately it comes down to your gut instinct, which tends to be right. Yeah.
And then the other 2 questions that I had were around, my daughter still needs a bottle in the middle of the night. She sort of wakes up, and I've tried to change that behavior by giving her a pacifier, rubbing her back, etc. She'll keep moaning and moaning and moaning until she actually gets milk. I've tried water in the bottle. Nothing seems to be working. Do you have any tips to break that habit? And finally, you mentioned putting the child into the crib. My daughter can climb out of her crib now, so I worry about her safety there. So those are my 2 other questions.
Right. So in terms of, the bottle at night, obviously that's just her way of putting herself back to sleep, particularly at the age of almost 2 years old. There's no easy way except saying, tonight, no more bottle. So with children, I'd say really after 1 year old, we really want to tell them what we're doing. Doesn't have to be a long soliloquy. It should be short information. Tonight, no more bottles. To prepare her sort of that afternoon, gives her a heads up. and then having sort of several days of a tough night, right, of tantrums in the middle of the night, but knowing that it will pass. If magically all the bottles in the world disappeared, she would be okay. And I would also want to know, related to her adenoids, breathing, all that kind of stuff, she may be waking because she's actually thirsty because she's potentially breathing through her mouth. So that sort of supports your case, getting a second opinion and trying to understand why does she wake so frequently at night. Some of it may, obviously, is habit, behaviorally, but some of it may be physical, sort of dry mouth. And then lastly, in terms of climbing out of the crib, yes, I am all too familiar with this. One of the reasons I am here today is because my older son climbed out of his crib at 18 months after trying for many, many months and landed on the floor. And I said, okay, we're done with this. So there are different opinions out there about when children are ready to go from a crib into a bed. Ultimately, we want them safe, right? So mattress on the floor or toddler bed that's very low on the ground is always okay. But at that point, we want to make sure the room is the crib, safety-wise, right? So you need to completely child-proof their room. And I always suggest an extra tall safety gate for the door. We don't want children locked in their room. And so a gate provides, communication, but safety. So I would say that would probably be your best bet.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for your question. And a reminder to folks, Googlers, you can go second opinion for a benefits service that you have available to you, or those watching on YouTube, if you work for someone else, you can ask your employee benefits arm if they have that available to you. All right, next question over here.
Hi, thanks for coming. My wife is so jealous. She wishes she could be here. So I'm going to try to channel her with this question. And it's basically, I have a 3-year-old, 10 months, and she wakes up often in the middle of the night. We put her to bed. We start the routine at 7:30. She sleeps from about 8 to 7:30, and she'll wake up in the middle of the night and she'll cry for mama, and I'm like, it doesn't bother me because she doesn't. If I try to go in there, it all hell breaks loose. So my wife goes in there and then she's able to get her to sleep, but she's just had it and she wants to just let her cry it out. Is that okay to let a kid that's almost 4 years old cry it out? And if so, how should we approach it? How long, and should I be going in there?
So you always have options, right? There's no one magical path. Otherwise, this would all be very simple. The cry it out proponents would say, yes, of course, it's fine. There are different methods of handling it. In some ways, I would encourage you as dad to step in, because of course she goes nuts. There's a full-blown tantrum that's waiting to happen. But in some ways, your child will benefit knowing that you're both in charge and you can both help in those kinds of situations when she's stressed and distressed, right? Whether you want to do that or not is your personal choice. With a child that's almost 4 years old, I think it really benefits everybody to have them involved in the process, which is acknowledging you put yourself to sleep, right? And that's what's missing here. At bedtime, does she have an easy time putting herself to sleep, or is mom putting her to sleep?
Bedtime, we have a routine where we do books and we do a song, and then we put her to bed. And then we have this thing called a freebie where we close the door, and then she's like, I want another kiss and hug, and we go back in. And that might happen twice. And then it's over. So we have to do this little song and dance, and then she goes to sleep.
Okay, but ultimately she goes into her bed and she puts herself to sleep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she goes to sleep pretty easily. Yeah.
Right. Although some of that stalling
So yeah, there's definitely.
maybe evolving, right? So whether you decide, whoever decides to get involved in the middle of the night, what's really important is to sit down with her at a neutral time, not at 7 p.m. on a Monday night, right? So let's say a weekend, 11 a.m. or something, and say, honey, you're not getting healthy sleep, and it's really time for you to learn how to put yourself back to sleep at night. You can also, and part of that discussion should be acknowledging that putting yourself to sleep is that skill, and every child in a bed, right? So it's not good or bad. Every child in a bed has to put themselves to sleep. So again, putting the responsibility and the onus on her. You can make a behavior chart with her. Now, she may either say, never mind, I don't care, I don't want to hear this discussion, or she may actually be interested in learning what we call sleep manners are. Sleep manners are just that, manners of cooperating at bedtime, laying in your bed quietly, and staying in your bed all night. And for a child in this situation, I would also suggest putting yourself to sleep, because that's obviously a goal. You can do days of the week with those behaviors, put it up in the kitchen, and then you review it every single morning and say, look, last night you did a great job cooperating at bedtime. You laid quietly in your bed. You called out at night, so I know you had a hard time with that, but I know you'll do better tonight. So it sort of acknowledges that the responsibility is hers, and over time, you want to build her up with rewards as she maintains those behaviors. And those rewards should always be an experience, not a thing, because she's not going to care about a toy. Within 24 hours, she's going to care about stickers.
Are stickers a thing?
Stickers are a thing on the chart, but what you're trying to get to, let's say after 3 nights of all of her manners, or 5 nights of all of her manners, is a trip to the Central Park Zoo with only mommy, because it's special, mom-daughter time. We want to reward with experiences. So there are definitely going to be full-blown tantrums for several nights in a row, particularly a child that's almost 4. But if either mom or you can stay consistent with that and saying, I'm staying here, you lay in bed, you put yourself to sleep, and sort of maintain that firm boundary, she should start getting better about it. And you may also want to get that clock, like I mentioned before. The clock is still blue for night. It's nighttime. It's not time to talk. It's not time to hang out. And when the clock says it's morning, then we can go spend time in the kitchen or whatever. So having that firm boundary at night is really important. But giving her the information ahead of time, I think, is key, because she's completely cognizant and aware. And so that's why I would say cry it out will probably work. But I think it's more respectful to give her information about how the rules are changing.
Okay.
Thanks. All right,
right,
sounds
thanks.
like OKRs for sleep. This is a Google joke. So we have a lot more questions. Let's see if we can get through all of them. Next one over here.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for coming. This is very timely for me because I actually have a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old.
Okay.
And so I have a 2-part question. The first is, what are your thoughts on co-sleeping within a room? So not in the bed, but the crib in the bedroom. Our 6-year-old, basically needs to have like a presence there. Otherwise, she doesn't go to sleep, and we have to, sit in the dark room with her. What are your thoughts?
So 6-year or 6 months?
6-month-old.
So, 6 month. Okay, so the American Academy of Pediatrics will recommend room sharing, which is what you're talking about, for the first 12 months. Okay, and that's...
She senses the presence of somebody in the room, and if there's nobody in there with her, she wakes up and, we have to get her settled again.
And 6 months, she's still fairly young, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Room sharing works for many people. It doesn't work for everyone. Some parents find it that it disturbs their sleep because they hear every little thing that the baby does, which doesn't necessarily need attending to. And they also, some parents find that the baby will sleep better in a different room. So I think it's very personal. But if you're comfortable with it and you sleep well and the baby's doing well, then I wouldn't worry about transitioning it until you feel ready.
Well, the second part of that is the 3-year-old. He grew up in a small New York apartment, and there was always somebody in the apartment in the room with him. Now he needs a door open, and we put a gate up, and we've tried closing the door at night, but like basically if he realizes the door is shut, like there's hell to pay.
Right.
So how do you address that for somebody that's kind of pretty far along in their behavior and habits?
I would say if it's not disrupting his sleep to have the door cracked, let him have it, right? Because that's obviously a psychological / control issue. I want to know that I can leave and be okay and that I am not completely separate. And that's okay. And I'm okay with that as long as there's not light flooding in and disturbing his sleep. I would let it go.
He makes sure that the door's open, and if the door's closed,
It's a problem.
It's a problem.
Right? So I would. That's a battle I wouldn't fight. Okay. There are too many others that you probably need to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right,
sure.
so doors always open policy over there. Thank you.
Yes.
Over here.
Hey, so I actually have a newborn. She's just 3 weeks, and obviously she isn't sleeping.
Yeah.
So my question is, what is the right age to sort of start all of these habits? And so right now she just falls asleep in our arms, and
Right.
we think that's fine because we don't need sleep.
Of course not.
And as soon as you place her in the crib, she's up. So it's the whole shock factor, I think. But we're fine because she's just 3 weeks old, and our pediatrician says she'll grow out of it. But we don't know when to start these kind of habits. Like, when should we start having a routine at bedtime? When should we start basically following all of this advice?
Right. So I would say I have a question. Of course, you see, I have a lot of questions. Does she dislike being flat? Like every time you put her down?
Yes. So she's just 3 weeks, but she goes on her side on her own. Like every time we place her on the crib or even with us, she'll always try to be on the side.
So being on your side tends to be where the contents of your stomach are the furthest away from your throat. So that's usually very comfortable for babies. They're not used to being flat. They're not flat in your utero. And the idea that, the first 3 months of a baby's life is sort of the 4th trimester, they're adjusting to being out of the room. So that's very common. I would say that after the first 6 weeks or so, we really want to see a gentle schedule developing where the clock is not a dictator, but the clock is a guide. Gee, I see you've been awake for almost 2 hours. You must be very tired. I'm going to get ready to put you down for sleep, right? Whether that's during the day or at night. So at about 6 to 8 weeks, I think that it's a great time to have a good, gentle routine for the evening and bedtime, and just start shaping things, looking at the clock, trying to follow a gentle schedule. So right now, she doesn't have the energy to stay awake through a feeding and all the other things that go on. And that's completely typical and normal. I do encourage parents to just get the baby used to wherever they're going to sleep. Bassinet, crib, again, putting them down 3 to 5 minutes so that they look around, they experience the place. It's okay, I'm fine, I can be in here. It's not stressful. I don't just wake up in this place and I don't remember how I got here. So if you can do that once or twice a day, great. And then at 6 to 8 weeks, can she gradually start falling asleep in the crib or bassinet? Can you put her down and see if she'll fall asleep there one time a day, just once? If not, if there's a lot of crying, pick her up, move on, don't worry about it. So at this point, just getting her used to a gentle schedule is great. And if you can do that by 6 to 8 weeks, you're in a very good place.
Thank you.
Sure.
Right, let's go for just 2 more, and then I'll remind folks, goodnightsleepcoaching.com is Christina Gantcher's site. Over here.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for coming. For new parents in the room, we did extinction at 4 months, and it worked really well for us. Within 5 days, he slept through the night.
He's 5 months now, so it was a month ago. So no major sleep problems yet, but we travel every weekend in the summer. It's a 4-hour drive, and I'm pretty scared to start doing that with him. He's already done the drive when he was younger, but it was before we were really on a schedule and doing a bedtime routine. So my plan for now is to start his routine in the apartment, give him his bottle, read his book, put him in his pajamas, his nighttime diaper, put him in the car at 7 when we normally put him to sleep, and have him fall asleep in the car, and then move him to a crib. It's worked once already. But do you suggest that I wake him up when we try to move him to the crib so that he remembers I'm not in the car anymore, I'm in a crib? Or if he's sleeping, put him in the crib and just let him be?
I would just transfer as gently as you can.
Okay.
Because behaviorally, it's not as if you need him to remember that. You're transferring him. You're not going to start the whole routine again at whatever time you arrive, so it sort of doesn't matter. And, you know, fingers crossed that he handles that transfer easily and moves on, and that's okay. And at this age, he's 5 months, so 6, 7, 8 months, it may work fairly well for him. You know, I think it's toughest when we try to do that at around a year or so, because most babies tend to be very cognizant of what's going on, and they won't always transfer easily anymore. So, you know, fingers crossed, and it could work. It could work well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then quick second question. Hasn't happened yet, but I'm terrified for teething because he's such a good sleeper already. Any general tips for night wakings as it impacts teething?
So teething is one of these things that you expect a tooth and 4 months later it comes out, right? It can last months. So, and also we want to recognize that teething happens all day. It doesn't just happen at 1 o'clock in the morning, right? So if your child is waking up and you think, oh, it must be teething, you're seeing signs all day long, right? It's not just in the middle of the night. There's really only 2 things I suggest. Number 1, ask your pediatrician what to give your child before bedtime, and potentially have it ready for the middle of the night, right? And be consistent with your behavior. It doesn't mean that you get to backslide and do anything differently, because getting into some other behavioral habit is not going to help the teething.
So if you're a fan of Extinction, for example, where we didn't go in at all when he was crying, and he cries in the middle of the night and we suspect it, you know, we've checked his temperature, he's not sick, he doesn't have a dirty diaper, we suspect it might be teething. Do you just then let him cry or give him something to soothe?
Right, I would, you know, whatever your pediatrician suggests between, you know, Motrin, Advil, Tylenol, I would definitely give that, and then out of the room.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, one last question over here.
Yes.
Thanks. I have a 22-month-old daughter who sleeps through the night, but she sleeps through the night in our bed, which is definitely not what I want. My wife seems ambivalent towards it. But we have another baby coming in September. So what's the best way to transfer her back to her crib?
Okay, so she has a crib in her own room or your room?
In her own room.
Okay.
Which we've started trying to put her in for naps, and that works most of the time. So she'll nap in her crib, but at nighttime, it's a pattern. So she'll go with her mom, and she takes a long time to fall asleep. So some like half hour to an hour most nights of singing or just whatever. So my wife will go to bed with her and get her to sleep before she goes to sleep in the bed. So,
Right, and what time is bedtime?
It varies, and she likes to go to bed late. So, well,
What
likes.
time?
But it doesn't matter what time we put her to bed. The half hour to an hour rule kind of holds. She's just active no matter what happens. And
So we're talking about late being like 8:39 or like 11?
no,
Okay.
9-ish, 8 to 9 is the usual time.
Okay, so I would say it's great that you have her in the crib during the day. Keep doing that for sure. I would probably just pick a time that's really convenient for both of you and say, okay, starting this Friday night, she's falling asleep at bedtime in her crib. It's going to be tantrums for several nights. If you and your wife decide that you can do it, it will probably be easier for your daughter to do that separation. You can stay with her and say, I'm here. You're in your crib. I'm here until you fall asleep.
I assume moving, yeah, so the extinction was probably bad for her because of the attachment kind of thing, so it would be better to do one of the other methods, I assume?
Yes, I totally agree, because she's really used to having a physical presence, right? So let's say you stay with her for several nights in a row, then you gradually start moving yourself out of the room, so you're by the doorway or in the hallway, and you're sort of coaching her, but not doing it for her anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the Talk to Google team and the event team. And thank you, Christina Gantcher, so much
you
for
for
coming
having
and
me.
sharing your expertise. And sweet dreams, everyone.